Another huge weekend of college football with the college football playoff rankings out for a second week. We bring in Peter Loshak from Sportsbook Review to help us sort out the betting lines. Peter, of course, thanks for joining us. So let's look
Sure.
at Memphis taking on Houston. Of course, the Tigers seem to be the group of five representative that was going to blow things up a couple of weeks ago, but they lost to Navy. Now,
Yeah.
Houston, with a little bit of a weaker resume, seems to be the torchbearer coming in at 9-0.
Yeah. Well, the line opened at about 6. Now it's up to about 7. Of course, Memphis got beat bad by Navy last week. I think that has something to do with it. Memphis, of course, has been a great road team this year. They travel well. Houston has not been a good home team, at least against the spread. They've lost 5 out of the last 7 home games. ATS, also Houston, has a very positive turnover margin for the year, which is partially, I'm sure, due to variance. I'm liking Memphis here at +7. Could wind up being the wrong side, but I'm liking Memphis +7. I did bet it, and if it loses, I'll take it. But it's a side I'm definitely liking.
Florida's already wrapped up an SEC Eastern Division championship. They limped to the finish with a 9-7 win against Vandy. Maybe doesn't bode well for an SEC title game appearance against most likely Alabama. But in looking for bigger sights set on their mind, they've got to obviously run the table. They go to South Carolina against a Gamecocks team that the record's not going to impress, but the last 2 outings, 1-score losses against Tennessee and Texas A&M.
Yeah, big home underdog line. Florida's offensive line was bad last week against Vanderbilt. There sure to be an improvement here, but how much of an improvement, I don't know. Probably still going to be a liability, and Florida's offense in general is just kind of limited. They're also South Carolina has they've covered 3 in a row. They lost, but they've been close. They've been covering. Their running game is getting better, and Florida might have some issues with stopping the run in this one. In general, these games between Florida and South Carolina have been close in recent years. So, unless I see a real reason to like a favorite, I'm almost always going to be liking the underdog. And if I like the underdog anyway in one of these matchups, then I'm usually liking it a lot. That is the case here. I'm going to be on South Carolina at +7.5 for sure. Probably pretty big. Liking South Carolina, not necessarily to win, but at 7.5, getting 7.5, definitely like South Carolina here.
Yeah, as you mentioned, the Gators could only muster 275 total yards and 57 in the second half against Vandy. We'll stay in the SEC here, Peter, with Bama and Mississippi State. Of course, Bama in that huge matchup against LSU. It wasn't a blowout, but they dominated the game up front on both sides of the ball. Derrick Henry running wild. Go up against what many consider to be the best quarterback in the SEC in Dak Prescott in Starkville.
This is a tough one because obviously Alabama is, Mississippi State's not going to run on Alabama at all. Alabama tends to do very well against, one-dimensional offenses, but Mississippi State's passing game has gotten increasingly better as the year has gone on. Nick Saban, did a press conference where he mentioned that it's really just a matter of how well Mississippi State's going to be able to pass on Alabama. It's kind of anyone's guess. There was some notable sharp action, though, that came in on this game on the over. The opening line was 50. Very clear, sharp action from sharp accounts came in on the over. Now it's 51.5. I guess you could take that to mean that Mississippi State will have some success passing on Alabama. So maybe that would make you also lean towards Mississippi State getting the points. But I'm not sure what I think about this one. The sharp action makes sense to me. Clear sharp action on the over and nothing as yet on the side, although the public is favoring Alabama, which is not a surprise there.
Got to wonder about the LSU psyche coming off a week in which many thought they were the best team in the country. They go up against Alabama and they get hit in the mouth, and now they have no championship hopes, and they're taking on Arkansas. And despite only having 1 loss, the college football playoff run for LSU is going to be very difficult. And Arkansas playing much better in recent weeks, had that miracle win, one of the craziest we've seen definitely this season, on that 4th and 25 flip over the head by Hunter Henry. Arkansas at LSU.
Yeah, you could make the argument that this is a situation where there's like a letdown / hangover for Arkansas, and Louisiana State will be kind of like, a pissed off team coming off a loss, coming back home. You could make that argument, but the line opened at 8.5. Now it's 7.5. Arkansas has also generally covered these matchups. Arkansas has actually covered 7 out of the last 8 meetings with Louisiana State. My sense is that Arkansas has some value. I also like the under. It opened at 59, though. Now it's down to 54. At 54, I'm not exactly sure what I'm thinking about it. And obviously Arkansas, first of all, they're passing better, and they, despite being a run-heavy team, they've been very, they've been an overtrending team recently. I would still lean Arkansas at 7.5, and at the total, I guess it would be a pass for me. But you can make an argument in favor of Louisiana State, in favor of LSU, but I would still like Arkansas at 7.5.
Here in the Big 12, it's all backloaded for everybody's schedule here in November. We've narrowed it down to 4 teams. We got our first slice of what we could see coming up with Oklahoma State knocking off TCU in a bit of a surprise. Oklahoma at Baylor. I'm a bit surprised at what's happened to this line. I believe it's down to 2.5 for Baylor.
You're surprised that it's gone down.
I'm surprised that Baylor's only a 2.5-point favorite at home.
Yeah, well, I can partially explain that with there's some advanced metrics that I've seen that give Oklahoma a significant edge statistically over Baylor. Now that those metrics is called F+. Oklahoma has an edge over Baylor in those rankings. Although Oklahoma didn't fare well against Tulsa earlier this year. Tulsa, obviously on offense tries to do what Baylor does a lot better. I would tend to agree with you on that. Also, sharp action came in on the under, which surprises me a little bit. The public is all over the over. Opened at 77, now it's down to 76. The public is on the over at about 4 or 5 to 1, a ratio of 4 or 5 to 1. But sharp action came in on the under. I'm not exactly sure if I agree with that. And, there could be sharp action that comes in later in the week on the over. But, if the sharps like the under, that would tend to indicate that, Oklahoma will have the edge defensively here and that they'll be able to limit Baylor's offense. I'm not exactly sure I agree with that. I would tend to agree with you that Baylor at -2.5 might be a good bet on the over. I'm actually leaning towards the over at 76, but I'm still feeling it out. Sharp action came in on the under, though.
I would be interested to see what the over-under is for the Big 12, let's say the top half of the Big 12 this season, because everybody's just shouting over, assuming every game's going to be over. But, of course, Vegas knows that and knows where to place the over-under.
The public has been cashing with a lot of those overs, though, in the Big 12, though. So, the sharp action, the early week sharp action coming in the under is not necessarily a guarantee that that's the right side. And also, Oklahoma has covered 7 out of the last 10 games on the road against Baylor. In general, Oklahoma has done well. But then again, Baylor has a great record recently, ATS at home in general. So this is a tough one, kind of a coin flip as far as the side's concerned. I personally would lean towards the over, but again, that puts me squarely in the camp of the public and against the sharps, which is usually not where you want to be, for sure.
Peter, I think this next game's really tricky because Iowa is playing for a Big Ten championship spot in the college football playoff. Minnesota's a 4-5 football team, but if you dig just a little deeper, Minnesota's played really well against very good teams in recent weeks, going to Columbus, playing Ohio State to a 21-14 game within a few minutes left until the Buckeyes scored late. Of course, the Michigan game down to the 1-yard line. Iowa not exactly blowing people out. I think this game was around 12, something in that range. I think that's a little high for me.
It's 12. Iowa's not blowing people out. They are covering, though. They're 6-3 against spread on the year. And last week's win and cover against Indiana was actually kind of impressive to me. Obviously, Indiana was off a bye. I know that there was a lot of sharp action that liked Indiana in that one. And it's understandable why. The fact that they came back and got the win and cover in that one was pretty impressive. Minnesota, we see a lot of games like this late in the season in college football where a team makes a big step up. They play competitively against elite teams for a couple of games in a row, and then they kind of lose it. And I'm thinking that might be what we might see here. Also, Iowa's definitely playing with revenge, right? They got blown out last year, 51-14. That's definitely another factor that they're aware of. It's tough to play, it's tough to outplay expectations if you're kind of a mid-range team as Minnesota is for 3 weeks in a row, and that's what they would have to do here. I haven't bet Iowa yet, but for me, actually, I understand what you're saying about how they're not blowing teams out. For me, this is either Iowa or a pass, and I'm leaning Iowa even at -12 for sure.
And I would hold up on that philosophy if I wouldn't have seen it again on the road. Minnesota's
Yeah.
pulled off a few of these decent efforts at home, but they finally did it on the road.
Yeah.
On the other hand, I think going in your favor with Iowa, if they're listening to all this college football playoff talk from all these analysts all over the place that are giving them absolutely no credit and
Right.
expect them not to stay in it.
And the other thing, it's just tough for a team when you're playing, above your head to do it repeatedly. You know what I mean? They get a boost one week, they come back, do it again a second week. If you're playing another legitimately elite team, now if I wasn't a legitimately elite team, I might look towards Minnesota getting another cover, but it's just tough to do that 3 weeks in a row.
Yeah, and I cannot expect Minnesota to run the ball against that Iowa defense at all.
Right.
All right, let's go out to the Pac-12. We got 3 really interesting games, and with college football playoff implications in the first 2. Oregon, we know what's happened to its season, but getting itself right in recent weeks. Going to Stanford, this had turned into, in recent years, the game in the Pac-12. Not so much this year with the Cardinal wrapping up the North Division, but they get their sights set on bigger things, and they need to continue to win. Stanford, a double-digit pick right now against Oregon.
-10. First of all, the Pac-12 is notoriously unpredictable and very tough to sort of analyze week by week. The best advice might just be expect the unexpected. Oregon obviously is starting to play a lot better, right? They're off. I wouldn't quite put them in the same in the same league as where they were, a few years ago with Mariota, but they're clearly a lot better than they were at the beginning of the year. Stanford, though, we've seen what Stanford can do, even against improving teams, even on the road as a big favorite, even against elite teams. And Stanford, they've covered all but 2 of their games this year. But Oregon, as an underdog, they have a great record. They're 6-0 against the spread in their last 6 games as an underdog, and 5-1 straight up in their last 6 games as an underdog. So it's tough. I might lean to the under because I'm assuming that Stanford will try to control the tempo and will be successful. Although 8 out of the last 10 games in Oregon, Stanford have gone over. But again, that was when Oregon had one of those unstoppable offenses, which is not quite the deal this year. Although, again, at this point in the season, it does appear to be getting more that way. And Stanford, Stanford has a much better offense this year, of course, they have in years past. And Hogan's becoming a double threat. So this game for me is going to be a complete pass.
Yeah, it's a tough one to peg.
Yeah.
You just figure that Oregon's not going to be able to keep Stanford off the field because.
I'm not saying that there isn't a sharp side or there isn't an edge to be had. I'm just saying that I don't see it.
All right, try to predict this one, Peter, because Arizona, some weeks, because of injuries and because of just better teams in the Pac-12, have looked atrocious, even losing to a Washington team by like 49-3. But then they come back last week and they play USC down to the final few minutes and play within 1 score. They're competitive in that one. They take on a Utah team that we see disrespected to a certain extent in the college football playoff rankings at number 10, but they only have the 1 loss, and Utah's playing for big things.
Yeah, classic, Pac-12 matchups and momentum scenarios. We don't quite know what to make of it. All the pressure here obviously is on Utah, right? For Arizona, they're just kind of like playing for their lives. It's senior night at home, a little bit pressure-free, but Utah has, a huge advantage. Arizona's banged up on the offensive line. That doesn't match up well with Utah's strength in the front 7. But then again, it's incredibly difficult, no matter whether you have a good team or a bad team, for a team like Utah playing where they're used to playing, to go into the heat in Arizona and get a cover as a road favorite. That's just not a situation that I want to be betting into. And in general, Arizona has had Utah's number. Arizona blew out Utah at Utah last year, so that shows you how well Arizona does tend to match up with them. On the other hand, that also puts Utah in a big revenge spot. I would lean Arizona here, getting 6 points. I'm not going to be betting it, though.
People have to consider where Washington State is this year. This is definitely the surprise team of the Pac-12, but even to underline that point, and I know you know this, Peter, 2 weeks ago against Stanford, they had a field goal kicker, hit 5 consecutive kicks. They drove the length of the field. He missed the 6th kick. If he makes that field goal, Washington State is tied with Stanford for the Pac-12 North, and they've got the tiebreaker. They would control the Pac-12. Washington State, their kicker would have made a 43-yard field goal. That's not the case, but still that proves just how well they're playing. They only gave up 24 points on defense, so they've matched the passing game with decent defense. They're going to the Rose Bowl, and I think they're pretty undervalued here against UCLA.
Yeah, I mean, the only thing I care about is from a betting perspective, and from a betting perspective, that Stanford game, again, wasn't even close. I mean, whether he made the field goal, whether he didn't make the field goal, the cover was never in doubt. Washington State has now covered 6 straight Pac-12 games, all by double digits. And we know how up and down, unpredictable the Pac-12 always is. So for a team to do that, that's indicates how solidly undervalued and underestimated they really have been all year long. I think you're right. Again, this is going to be as yet, the sharp action has been coming in on Washington State week in and week out. It might come in later on in the week. As yet, it actually hasn't, and the public is starting to bite on Washington State, which is not a great sign. And another problem here is that UCLA has a very strong run game, which is probably going to be a little bit of a vulnerability for Washington State. Going to be able to keep their offense off the field. A little bit tricky here. The one notable thing, though, is that the public is all over the over in this one, 65.5. And just like the Baylor game, sharp action came in on the under. It's got the exact same betting profile as the Baylor game in terms of the total. Public all over the over at a ratio of like 4 or 5 to 1. Notable sharp action came in on the under, which does make sense when you assume what UCLA's game plan is going to be, which is run heavy, and you got to figure that they're going to be successful and probably have some long drives in the run game and keep Washington State's offense off the field. So as of right now, it appears that the under is the best way to play this game as far as the sharp action is concerned. And as far as bet on Washington State, I certainly wouldn't bet on UCLA here. The public is, though, coming in on Washington State. That's not a great sign. And as yet, there hasn't been sharp action on Washington State either, which is also not a great sign. But again, they've been systemically undervalued this year, and it's not likely to have all of a sudden corrected itself in this 1 week after yet another double-digit cover that they got last week. So that's the betting profile for this game. As for me, as of right now, it's a pass. If I had to make a bet right now, it'd be on the under.
All right, folks, you hear the information, the insight, and the research. Peter Loshak doing a great job. Please join him on Sportsbook Review. Peter, people love this segment, so we appreciate the time.
Oh, my pleasure. Thanks so much.